Taste of the Unexplainable by Don D. Corcel. You've seen examples of some pretty amazing events that occurred at different times of my life. But now, take note of the difference. While my earlier experiences were indeed noteworthy, they weren't at all on the same league as the last one. When you experience something like that, it changes you. It changes the way you think. It changes what you think is possible. Your mind is shocked into openly considering new possibilities. And this brings me to the real beginning of my story. A meeting I attended that must have opened or changed me somehow, because the really powerful experiences, like the lightning, occurred after this meeting. But before I get to that, I need to prepare you a little bit. What do you see when you close your eyes? It's a trick question. Think about it. Most people would quickly answer, nothing, right? But if you gave it more than a second's thought, you'd realize you do perceive something. It's just quiet and different from your everyday life. You might see specks of light leaking through your eyelids, something vaguely similar to staring up at the night sky. What you're observing is the edge of your perceptions. Whether you're staring up into outer space or the inside of your tightly closed eyes, the blackness, the edge of your perceptions is there, a silent reminder there's more going on around you than you'll ever know. This chart shows the narrow band of reception our senses take in over the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Over this entire range, there's not much we're actually perceiving. And how about your mind? Doesn't it have its own sense of darkness? When you lose or forget something, where does that memory go? Doesn't it seem lost in the dark? The edge of your perceptions again. And this was the answer I was looking for. An understanding that nothing, the edge of your perceptions, is actually something. Chapter 5. My experiences and thoughts about these things ultimately led me to an experimental meditation session held by one of my colleagues. We already knew our senses were limited and blocked most of what was going on around us. Our goals were to reach out with our minds and contact beings we presumed existed beyond our perceptions. Enlightened beings that could guide humans in the affairs of spiritual advancement and enlightenment. There could be other life forms, beings of some kind, existing in the very same space as ours. I had no difficulty with that at all. Through the ages, people have reported otherworldly presences of various kinds. To my mind, this only confirmed our possibilities. The big question, though, was whether these presumed beings had greater levels of intelligence, and whether they had the ability to communicate. Our experiment then was simple. We would attempt to communicate with them through telepathy. Now, consider for a moment. What would you be thinking about if you were about to participate in this experiment? I'll tell you what I was thinking about. What would a conversation with an enlightened being be like? What would you say to them? How should you behave? If their conversation style were different, would you even recognize their communications? And of course, there was the big question. How would you know if they're real? I was directed to sit on the living room floor, and after a few brief instructions, we began. I closed my eyes, but remained alert, while the hostess read meditative passages from a book. Now, before we go any further, I had a powerful and I guess spiritual experience during and after this session. Something in what you're about to see changed or opened me, and exactly what triggered this reaction I can't say. I had a few different dreamlike experiences, and like dreams, they smoothly overlapped one into another. So keep an eye out for the experience you think pushed me over the top. They all took me by surprise. The hostess read meditative passages that spoke about feeling profound love and seeing an inner light. Now, I couldn't envision these things. I was only aware of the blackness. But as I became more composed, I started to perceive something gathering around me. Whether this was a feeling or visual, I can't say. Only that they seemed like tiny particles floating in the darkness of my mind. As I focused my awareness, their appearance seemed to brighten. They were like tiny pieces of gold foil or gold dust, glittering weightlessly all around. A dim light seemed to radiate overhead. The next thing I knew, I heard the hostess reading from her book again. I presumed I had dozed off, so I quickly resumed my alert, determined attitude. A little bit later, the darkness in my mind cleared once more. I found myself overlooking a range of distant mountains. Several robed figures whom I couldn't see clearly approached. One of them touched or rubbed something on my forehead. Instantly, a sparkling light zoomed down on me. As I stared at it, it seemed to transport me back in time, 20 years, where I collapsed from food poisoning and experienced all that you see next. A most unusual, vivid dream. I found myself in a chamber among many undulating objects. They looked like floating bubbles of water. I had no body. I could move just by thinking up. Fascinated by their appearance, I drew closer. I just re-experienced a moment in my life, in every detail. I tried another. Their appearance hinted at the experience it contained. And each experience was so intense. Places I'd been, even my dreams were there. People I knew. This was a museum of my life. At the edge of the field, I wondered what might lie beyond. Just beyond lay a region of total darkness. There was nothing there to perceive. Should I investigate it? What if I get too far away from the land? I guess I thought of the field of memories as being like land, a place of relative safety compared to the featureless void ahead. Did I know my way out of the blackness if I got lost? I wasn't sure I did. There were no indications of where I'd been, no trail to follow back. Cautiously, I proceeded a bit farther, then looked back. I wasn't lost yet. I could still see where I'd been. The field of floating memories was much smaller. My memories clumped together into a ball or a sphere, as though they pulled at each other with gravity. I ventured onward. There was no turning back now. I couldn't see the field of memories anymore. Wait a minute. Was it my imagination, or was the blackness not quite as dark as it had been? Sure enough, I seemed to be surrounded by a dimly lit fog. I proceeded on, the fog now starting to look like a tunnel, with a faint light at the far end. It got lighter and lighter. Then the fog started to clear around my feet. Interesting, I didn't have feet before. Now I did. I was standing on something warm to the touch. I was on a beach. I looked up and felt drawn to the sun and found myself easily gliding upward toward it. Getting closer, I realized the sun was not the sun we normally think about, millions of miles away. Rather, this was more like a brilliant floating disk. I wanted to touch it, like I did with the memories. That's when I realized I couldn't move anymore. I was completely frozen in place. I started to panic. What should I do? I started to vibrate with increasing intensity and distort like some powerful sine wave was acting upon me. I was afraid it would soon tear me apart. That's when I started moving backward, like a rope pulling me back to the beach, back to the fog, back to the blackness, and back toward the field of floating memories, all at an alarming speed. I would have screamed, but I didn't have a body again. I was simply a focal point of consciousness. Thwack. I think I understood. Yeah, I remember that dream well. I had gotten food poisoning that evening, and to minimize the pain, I became very, very still, then passed out and had that vivid dream. But now I see that wasn't a dream. That was a near-death experience with all the classic symptoms. I reviewed my life, went through a tunnel, found myself in a beautiful place, and finally confronted a being of light who, I guess, sent me back. I stared at the light, wondering, was this some sort of conversation? Was I being asked some sort of question? The sparkling light was in the same general position as the sun disk in that dream. I thought about touching it, then remembered what happened the last time. I considered for a moment, and then with a determination that surprised me, I mentally leaped for it. Sparkles seemed everywhere. Then I opened my eyes. Well, getting up I felt refreshed and alert, but was I just asleep? I honestly didn't know what to say, so I ended up saying nothing of my experiences. I didn't even know where to begin. Earlier I said something might open or change me somehow. That occurred next. During my drive home, I suddenly became aware of waves of the most luxurious feelings. They started slowly, then began to build until I felt I was being carried away. Waves of exquisite harmony. The experience was practically overwhelming. It was so powerful that within minutes, the thought of living without this harmony seemed unbearable. I floated on these waves, like a raft on the ocean. At the crest of each wave, the feelings were the strongest. It was at those peaks I became aware of different feelings or packets of feelings you had to connect in sequence to understand.
Cities of two worlds.
I couldn't understand the packets until
Citizen of two worlds.
they drifted clearly into my conscious mind. Citizen of two worlds. It was like the idea was being injected into my mind, and there seemed to be some truth to it. I was receiving two distinctly different sets of stimuli. One set from my hands on the wheel, my eyes watching the road, and the other these wave-like feelings of delicious harmony. I was experiencing both sets at the same time, and the combined experience was quickly transforming me in the way I thought.